Good afternoon. I can see that one of our speakers today is already present. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our webinar. For the first time this year, it is devoted to research results presented by two speakers who I hope are already with us. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So please welcome Professor Patrick Sins and Jaap de Brouwer, both from Saxion University, who initiated their research with a very, we could say, intriguing question: what defines a Montessori school? What defines a Montessori school? And at the very first glance, this question might seem quite obvious, but as we can see today, I hope we will see today that this question is more complex than we can actually think about it. And I think that I will give the floor, or the screen, I should say, maybe the screen to Professor Patrick Sins and Dr. Jaap de Brouwer. Maybe yeah, I will give floor to you guys. If there is anything I can help you with, then please tell me. Also, I have to tell you that each time when we have webinars, we try to record them. So if there was anyone who could not join us today, they could have that possibility to and watch it in some other time. So I do hope you do not mind if we record it. If anyone does not like this idea, please let me know. I think that our webinar today, we will start with the presentation of Professor Sins and Jaap, and then hopefully we will have a little bit of time for discussion. So I would like to give this floor or screen to Patrick and Jaap. Are you ready, guys?
Always.
Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome. Okay, so floor is yours, or screen is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I will try to share my screen with you, in the hope this will all work. I hope you will see the presentation right now.
Yes, everything is okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Welcome all for joining us in this webinar. My name is Jaap de Brouwer, and I'm working as a Montessori teacher trainer in the Netherlands, but also educational researcher. And I'm here together with Patrick. You want to introduce yourself, Patrick?
Hello, everybody. I'm really happy that we can organize this for you. I'm Patrick Sins. I'm professor in alternative education at Saxion University of Applied Sciences and at Thomas More University of Applied Sciences.
Right. Our subject of today is what defines a Montessori school. And we have done a study in the Netherlands and also in a small study in Europe. And we will present some of our first results on this research. And we'll also hope to reflect and have some dialogue about the impact of our research for the Montessori community. So what defines a Montessori school? Which is quite a good question. So to start, I just wanted to ask you to go to menti.com and use the code, because I have a question for you. What defines your Montessori school, or what do you think what should define a Montessori school? And you can answer those questions, and you can use the code 8544911, and I will start it right now and share that screen as well. I have to work very quick now. Yes. So the question is, I will share the screen. what defines your Montessori school? And if you will answer that question, it will show up in our shared screen. So already one participant has answered.
It was my my answer.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought maybe someone read the paper, but yeah.
Yeah, me.
Me too. Come on.
Great, great. So I'll give you 1 more minute to answer this question. It's right, 7 people already answered. Great, 8. Right, it's just let's have a quick view. Freedom, people say, prepared environment, freedom of choice, educational climate, all right, independent learning or independence, a lack of organization, great, a third teacher, mixed age groups, self-construction, joy, curriculum individualization, independent learning, great, all right. So we have many different aspects of Montessori and how to define it. So I will stop sharing this screen and I will have show my presentation again. Just a minute. Yeah, here I go again. All right, thank you for answering that, because that was a question we also had to answer. What defines a Montessori school? And as we can see, there are many different answers to that question. And but it's quite problematic that there are many different answers on that question when you're doing research. So so why should we measure the implementation of the Montessori concept? Because in my work as a Montessori teacher trainer, I do visit a lot of different Montessori schools in the Netherlands. And it's sometimes astonishing to see that they are really different. So I just took some pictures from Google, so don't pretend this the Netherlands. But this is a Montessori school, for example. You can see it, there are materials indeed, but this is also a Montessori school. And they're quite different from each other, right? But they're both called Montessori school, and they both have this name Montessori school. I thought the way they implement the concept could be probably different. So Montessori schools do implement the concept differently. And that's also problematic when you want to do research, because when we look at research results on Montessori outcomes, we see that some research indicates that Montessori schools shows better cognitive and social outcomes. But there are also a lot of studies who doesn't show better outcomes. So how come these results are these results are different when talking about Montessori schools? You should expect that they have some sort of the same implementation of the concept. So as some first remarks is the implementation of the Montessori concept differs widely. So research outcomes are also biased because of the way Montessori schools implement the concept. And which relate to our own question, which I asked you, what defines your Montessori school? There are different perspectives on what Montessori should entail and how you should implement it in your school. So people do have different views on what Montessori education should look like. So taking it all together, I do have an example, and this is an example of a study Angelina Liller did in the United States. And here's what she did. She compared different schools with each other on outcomes like executive functioning, maths, social problem solving. And she compared Montessori schools with traditional schools, but she also compared the Montessori schools with each other, and she separated them from having the classic Montessori schools and the more supplemented Montessori schools. So she tried to see what are the differences between these three types of schools. So to be a classic Montessori school in Lillard's study, you should have at least a 3-hour work period in the morning and in the afternoon. You should have a mixed age classroom with at least 3 years of age grouping, a single AMI trained teacher, I'm sorry, and have a set of specific Montessori materials. So all those schools who were supplemented, who was called supplemented Montessori schools, did not have these 3-hour work period in the morning and afternoon, or have these mixed age classrooms, or have a single trained AMI teacher with an assistant, or did use other materials next to the Montessori materials. So when I was reading this and I had in mind all these Dutch Montessori schools, I would say, all right, all Montessori schools in the Netherlands are following Lillard. All Montessori schools in the Netherlands are supplemented, because we do use additional materials next to the Montessori materials. We do not have all AMI trained teachers, for example. So this is how she compared. So she said there are classic Montessori schools, there are supplemented Montessori schools, and you have more conventional classic traditional schools, for example. And she compared them on outcomes. And she compared them on outcomes on what did I say just next? Math, social problem solving, executive function. So here are the results. The Montessori schools did outperform the traditional schools, but the supplemented schools performed as good as the more traditional schools. So here's what Lillard said. She said, only when we do a classical implementation of the Montessori concept, only then the results will be better on those outcomes as executive function, math, social problem solving, as traditional schools do. So there are differences. Indeed, there are differences in the way Montessori schools implement them, and they do have impact on results. All right, some first conclusions based on this is, yeah, Montessori schools do differ in implementation. That's a fact, right? Yeah, all right. Variation in implementation can lead to differences in result, as we can see in research on Montessori education. Yeah, and also one thing Patrick and I found out is there is a great need for a more robust way, a more fine-grained way of assessing those Montessori implementation, because when following Lillard, as I said before, all Dutch Montessori schools should be supplemented, but it does not leave much room for other ways of implementing the Montessori concept, for example. So we need to have a more fine grained way of assessing Montessori implementation. If there are any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I will just go on. All right. So searching for how could we measure Montessori implementation, we came to this, we saw this article written by Angela Murray, and she developed an instrument for measuring Montessori instruction, and we have translated it into Dutch. And we have used it for our Dutch study and also for our European study. And it says Montessori could be defined in 3 factors. First is the group structure, the way the group is structured in a Montessori way, of course. The other is the Montessori curriculum. And the third is the children's freedom. And she has set up a questionnaire for early childhood teachers and one specific for upper and lower elementary teachers. So there were 2 different questionnaires. For example, for example, questions about group structure, for example, where observation is used for daily lesson planning. An example of a question in the Montessori curriculum is children can walk on the line while carrying objects. Freedom of children, example is children determine how long to work on an activity. So there are more questions per factor, like group structure has 4 or 5 questions, for, I guess, but these are just examples of them. And we do have different questions with the same factors for group structure, Montessori curriculum, and freedom of children for elementary school teachers. Like children record activities, going out excursions, and also freedom of children determine how long to work on an activity. So let's just have a quick inventory when talking about children's freedom. We used a 4-point Likert scale to question the 1 score. It says never occurs in my classroom, and having a 4 score is always occurs in the classroom. So I will ask you to go to Mentimeter again and use the same code and fill in these questions, and we can have some mean how we think about freedom of children in our own classes. I will start presenting again and share my screen. Just a minute. Next question, yeah. Oh, present, yeah. Share it. You can fill in the questionnaire from menti.com again. So you can have an impression of how we work with the questionnaire. All right, 1 minute left for answering this question. All right. 12 people answered this question. And as you can see, there are different items like children decide where they will work. Children will choose their own work or activity. Children determine how long to work on an activity, listen, give to individuals. And we do have a mean of 3.1, which is quite good. So they're pretty good Montessorians over here, I guess. So when having all of these participants taking it together, we could have a mean on the factor freedom, for example. So we can say how is freedom implemented in these Montessori schools. So it's just to have, just to show you. Oh, there's also a chat. Is there all? Yeah, I will check. All right. We also do have some questions about group structure and curriculum, but I won't show them right now because we have to go further. And I will show the presentation again. Just a minute. Yeah. So we asked Montessori teachers to fill in our questionnaire. It took them about 10 to 15 minutes to fill it in. And we asked them in our first study in the Netherlands. And almost 450 Dutch Montessori teachers answered our question. Most of them were teaching in elementary, and there were 131 early childhood teachers. And they came from 79, do I say it right? Yeah. Different Montessori schools in the Netherlands. We have about 170, so which is quite good. There are a lot of teachers joining our questionnaire. And I will show you now some quick results. And I will focus on some individual questions out of the questionnaire, but it gives you some identification of how the Montessori concept is implemented in the Netherlands. So here we go. First factor is group structure. And as you can see, it looks like the older you become in the Montessori schools in the Netherlands, the more group structure will be realized over there. But I have to say it's group structure in a Montessori fashion. So that's really good to know. So in early childhood, there is less group structure as there is in upper elementary, for example. So just to show you some items, early childhood and upper elementary teachers do observe more, as they say. Or you could turn it otherwise and saying lower elementary teachers do observe less. Upper elementary teachers track activities more, and elementary teachers receive more lessons from each other. Elementary children receive more lessons from each other, which is quite interesting. Why isn't that there in the early childhood? That pupils are teaching each other lessons, for example. So sorting out these individual items just gives them some insight on how Montessori is implemented in the Dutch Montessori schools when talking about group structure. Oh, here they are. Sorry, I was too fast. We also do have the results of on the Montessori curriculum, and here you can see that the early childhood teachers do implement the Montessori curriculum more, or they say they do implement it more as the lower elementary or the upper elementary teachers do. And we also have the results on children's freedom, and there's also a great example of early childhood teachers who do say they have more Montessori freedom to their children as lower and upper elementary teachers do. So, for example, early childhood and upper elementary children teachers give the children more freedom to choose their own activities, which is also quite interesting, because it also says that lower elementary teachers do give the children less freedom to choose their activities. So taking it all together, this is quite a graph to say, but taking it all together, you should say that the Montessori schools in the Netherlands do differently implement the Montessori concept, and you can see it in the results as we take a look at early childhood, lower elementary, and upper elementary. These are different ways of implementing the Montessori concept, but you can also see it on the different factors, like the way freedom is implemented on the different levels. But we also can see it, the difference between schools, because it's not only a tool for doing research for us and to say how does the a normal Montessori school in the Netherlands look like, but it also is a tool for reflection for the Montessori schools on their own practice. Because when we do have a mean on how the Montessori concept is implemented in the Netherlands, schools can reflect on their own practice by showing their own results and comparing their own results with the Dutch means, for example. So I just gave an example over here. A school name. The blue graphs are just one school in the Netherlands for early childhood, and the red is the mean for Dutch Montessori schools for early childhood. So schools can also use it as a reflection on their own Montessori practice, because they can compare themselves to 450 other Montessori teachers in the Netherlands, which is quite interesting, because we have experienced that it helps them to discuss and to set up a dialogue about how do we implement the Montessori concept in this way, and why do we do it in this way. So it's also a tool for reflection for Montessori teachers. All right. Any questions about our study? I just did it in a very short time.
There's somebody asking, Esther Smulders, is it possible to receive the Dutch translation of the article? Yeah, well, I will put in the link in the chat so you can download it right away if you want. So we have it in Dutch, indeed. I think that's also interesting. Maybe, Jaap, you can show the results of the Dutch teachers. So this chart with a lot of bars, and can you?
Yeah, I will go back
to that slide. I think that's really interesting in this slide is two things. First, that you see when you don't see classic Montessori schools in the Netherlands. If you're a classic Montessori school, you would score a 4 on each scale. You would score a 4 on structure, a 4 on curriculum, and a 4 on freedom. So this is the first result that I think is remarkable. So you don't see classic Montessori schools in the Netherlands, but you also see there's a lot of variation between the different elementary, upper elementary, and early childhood, but also within schools. So also within a school, you see differences in the way Montessori is implemented.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So when doing this research in the Netherlands, we had this meeting before COVID. We had this real meeting in Dublin, or in what was it, Prague, and we said maybe we should also have this study in Europe, so we can compare implementation in Europe, all over Europe, of the Montessori concept. So here are some preliminary results for our European study, and I will say only the first result, and I've done only a few. I'll show you only a few results because we are not finished yet. All right, so 177 European Montessori teachers filled in our questionnaire. Most of them were early childhood teachers, but there were also 72 elementary teachers. And there were about 180 different Montessori schools, which is quite remarkable because most of them are called CASA, of course, or something like that, or Montessori school. They call themselves Montessori school. So I couldn't define all of them because most of them are named the same from 29 different countries, which is quite good. And now I will show you some results, but these are only the first preliminary results of the elementary teachers. And I've taken them together, so I didn't divided them in upper or lower elementary, because I saw in the data that most of the European teachers are teaching 6 to 12-year-old kids, and not as we do in the Netherlands, 6 to 9 and 9 to 12. So I've taken them as a whole and called them elementary teachers. So here we also see group structure, and I try to show you the results, but only from those countries who had at least 3 or more participants, because otherwise it's not quite representative for the country. Of course, 3 is not quite representative for French, for example, but yeah, it's just some first result. And as you can see here, group structure, yeah, you should be in Spain for having good examples of Montessori group structure. Well, it shows that there's also differences in the way the Montessori concept is implemented over Europe in different countries. So we could do the same for a curriculum, and I took the Netherlands apart because we can compare the way we do it in the Netherlands with other European countries, for example. But yeah, Spain is quite good again. Yeah, I should go to Spain. Yeah, as you can see, curriculum and the way it's implemented, you can see it over here as well. Germany and Austria and Spain are top 3 when implementing Montessori curriculum, as teachers said themselves. So we asked teachers, how do you implement the Montessori curriculum? And you can also see it for the same graph when talking about freedom. So this gives us some insight on how the Montessori concept is implemented in Europe, and it's quite the same as we saw in the our Dutch study, because the way the Montessori concept is implemented is different over countries, but perhaps also different within countries. So the way the Montessori concept is implemented, yeah, is different. So now we do have this tool, this questionnaire to assess how Montessori schools implement the Montessori concept. Is quite good for us to know, because when doing research on Montessori schools, we can answer one question right now, because the first question we have to answer is, we're doing research on Montessori schools, but what kind of Montessori schools are we researching right now? And while using this tool, we can say, all right, these schools which are participating in our research implement the Montessori concept in this way, for example. So we can show them then talking about how do they implement the concept, and the result, the outcomes on the research projects. Do they influence each other, for example? It's a question we can try to answer right now. For example, we're currently working on a study on the executive functions of Montessori children compared to traditional children in traditional schools. but we also try to separate the Montessori schools, as Lila did in her study, by saying, all right, can we also see differences between Montessori schools or within Montessori schools on outcomes for executive function. So we can use it as a research tool, but we can also use it, as I said before, as a tool for schools to reflect on their own practice. All right, any questions about the European study? I will go back. Any remarks?
Yep, there is a question on the chat, if I may butt in. And this question is by Zarota. I don't know if you have access to the chat. Shall I read it aloud or?
Yeah, all right, I will check. Why different aspects of Montessori ideas are implemented to different? What is the reason? So only, yeah, good question. Well, that's a educational guess. What should be the reason for implementing the Montessori concept differently? It could be educational policy of the country, for example, or some schools do have, or some countries do have a fixed curriculum, which it also makes it hard for other countries to have the Montessori curriculum implemented, for example. It could also be a lack of knowledge, or a lack of different perspective, or saying there are new educational insights, scientific educational insights, which we also implement in the way we implement the Montessori concept, for example. So there could be different reasons for having this implementing Montessori concept in different ways. I didn't ask teachers why or how these ways of implementing are different. I hope I have answered Doreta's question. All right, I will go further, because we also want to do some further research, and we do have this Dutch Montessori research group. It's written in Dutch, but I won't translate it for you. But we do have this Dutch Montessori research group with researchers, but also Montessori parents, and also Montessori teachers, or Montessori school leaders. How do you say it? Administrators, yeah. And together we formed the Dutch Montessori research group, and we said, all right, we have to continue our work with doing Montessori research in the Netherlands. And we also have this European Montessori research group, which is called MERGE. And we also want to expand our study on Montessori implementation in Europe. So there are, for our future research, Patrick and I said we need at least 500 European participants in our implementation study. So we need your help. We need your help. And we now do have 172, I guess. But there's also one other thing we found out, and that was that it's some form of self-selection. So Montessori teachers who think they are doing implement the Montessori concept quite well are more willing to fill in our questionnaire. But that's just the way as they see it, right? So we do not have these classroom observations. So we said we said to ourselves, maybe we can use the questionnaire, and we could translate it into an observation tool or observation instrument. So we can do classroom observations about how teachers implement the Montessori concept. So for future research, we're currently working on an observation tool based on this questionnaire. And I will show you some first work. It's not finished yet, but I'm very grateful with my Dutch Montessori research group and those participants in it, because we're working hard together to have some sort of observation tool for observing teachers while working in their classroom and observing the different aspects of the Montessori concept. So here's what we did. For example, this is the factor of freedom. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions in it. And we tried to have some criteria for it. So children choose their work or activities, and never occurs in the classroom is work or activities are chosen by the teacher, and always occurs in the classroom is children choose their own work or activities. So we will work it out further, but as I will see it now, one observer is in the classroom and observing a teacher working in his class with the children and observing, are children choosing their own activities or not, and in which way. And the same is for determine how long they will work on the activity, decide where they will work, have full access to a set of Montessori materials, and lessons are given to individuals, which all will form together the factor of freedom. So I'm really curious about your opinion. Will this work? How will this work? Is it a good way of assessing Montessori implementation by observing teachers what they will do? Yeah, I just need some feedback from you and a discussion and remarks, comments on is this a good next step in doing Montessori research? So, which is a question. So I hope all the participants will say and give me feedback and say, yeah, you should do it, or no, you shouldn't do it.
Okay, so I don't know if I should answer this question. Probably.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
As a host, so to say, but of course you should. Of course you should. The question about the observation tool is who. I mean, so the question for me is not whether you should do it or not, but the question is who should do it. And why is that important? Because, of course, once we have external observer in the classroom, then it changes the whole story, of course. So because the behaviors become different. So the external observer affects the environment, right? And if so, then maybe, so I would say, yes, of course, it should be done. But the question is who and in what kind of conditions it should be done. So I think that is the question that I would pose.
Yeah. And should it be a researcher, for example, or could it be teachers observing each other? Yeah,
and also shouldn't it be a peer observation, because it's also the place in the structure I think is important. Yeah. So even if you ask administrators of the school to observe the teachers, that will also affect how they work.
Yeah.
So there is I would say for me the key question here is who might do it, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Any other remarks on this?
I think because Yap, you can't see it in the chat, but there are quite a few remarks.
Yeah.
Responses. So
depends how long.
Yeah, maybe Esther, maybe you can put on your microphone because you're having quite an interesting contribution to the chat.
No, we can't hear you yet.
Yeah, because Esther is actually writing in the chat that it can also be interesting to ask the kid themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And Sarah writes, who will answer? That's also a question. I think we will get different answers depending on the role in the classroom. Whether this is, for example, I don't know, as I understand it, but Sarah, maybe you should say that. I mean, I shouldn't.
Yeah. Peer observation tend to yeah, we could yeah, and we also discussed it because it could be used as in different ways. It could be used as a research tool for assessing Montessori implementation, and not having only the data, as Montessori teacher said, they're implementing the concept themselves in our questionnaire, but also having empirical data, which is observed to look how they do it. So, and then maybe we can have these two data sets come together and see if there are any differences between the observed implementation and the questionnaire. So that could be interesting, for example, and then observation should be by researchers, for example. But you can also use it as a tool for reflection on your Montessori practice, and then you use it as teachers as a peer review, for example, or teachers observing each other and having a dialogue or discussion about how they implement the Montessori concept in their own classroom. So it also depends on which goal you have by using this instrument. Right, any other remarks or comments? Because I need it to go further on this work and have some thoughts about the progress on this work. Yeah, maybe the observers should be trained, indeed, yeah. All right. Thank you so far. I will go, depends on the observation time. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we should more specify that later when we first have to work on the observation tool to have it more straightforward, and then we can discuss the time, how many times and who. All right. So I will continue.
Yeah, if I can butt in just for a second, because the quantifiers that we have in this tool, which is never and always, right, are very big. And my question is whether, because how long would I have to observe a classroom in order to say never or always?
Yeah.
So is it, is it enough to spend a week in the classroom to say always or never?
Yeah.
Or a day, or so my doubt is whether these words are applicable in this in-class observation. So can this four-step scale be used in exactly the same way as it is used as a research tool? That's also a question, because never and always, this kind of remark you can, I think, say on the basis of some experience, some longer time, as I understand, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, of course, but that's just...
No, good remark, really good remark. We use the same scale as in the questionnaire, so we could compare the questionnaire with the observation tool. So that was one reason why we did it. So, but it's a good remark. How many, do you have a week? Spend a week? A year, maybe. But good remark. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, reflection and remarks. All right. So I would like to end with, of course we need you, but before that, I would ask you about our whole study on Montessori implementation. Are there any reflections or remarks during this webinar, or questions you have about your own Montessori implementation? I was just wondering, what you think about it. Should we do, should we, for example, should we have more the same way of implementing the Montessori concept in our schools? Is that a good or a bad thing? Or do we need it in the more same way?
Or is it possible to have?
Yeah.
Is it possible to have more or less the same Montessori? That's the question.
Yeah. And is there a need to do it? Yeah.
So Sarah is writing in the chat.
Yeah.
Can we challenge the point that classic Montessori schools would score 4 on the scales? Can we gather data on this? Can we send the same questionnaire to these schools and ask them to answer?
Yeah.
I feel that merely stating that these schools would automatically score on a 4 on each point is a vastly sweeping statement. This should be qualified through data. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe as an addition to this is that, well, Angelina Lillard in a study that Jaap mentioned, where she differentiated between the classic Montessori schools, supplemented Montessori schools, and the regular schools, she decided on a much more rudimentary distinction between supplemented and classic. And in our research, you only see supplemented Montessori schools. So you could ask yourself, where are the classic Montessori schools? Maybe it's only that they are in the States. And it would be quite nice idea to have these 6 classic Montessori schools, which were part of Angelina Lillard's study. How would they score on our questionnaire and our observation instrument? I'm not sure, but I think that our observation and survey more or less provides more variation in how you answer, instead of saying that you're a classic or a supplemented Montessori school. And this is indeed a discussion that we need. So not only between researchers, but also between researchers and Montessori teachers, but also between Montessori teachers themselves.
And I also see another question of Annika Albrecht. How does Lillard define a more or less pure Montessori implementation? Well, she said those schools implement the Montessori concept as outlined in the books of Maria Montessori herself. So that's quite straightforward.
That is not very operational, isn't it? So,
no, it isn't. So she came also up with 6 points or 7 points, as I referred to earlier in the presentation.
These were schools that have 3-hour work periods in the morning and afternoon. These are schools that have a 3-year age grouping. So if you don't have a 3-year age grouping, you're another classic Montessori school, according to this study. That there is a single AMI trained teacher and a specific set of Montessori materials. According to these criteria, Lillard scores you as being a classic Montessori school.
Yeah. All right.
I think that Micah also has interesting, is it observation time or how many times of observation? Depends, I think. Depends on if you're doing research. I think that several observations would be needed, even though, well, you're practically it's difficult to visit all the schools that you want to observe. So you need to have some kind of pragmatic way of observing. But if you use it as a reflection tool together with your teacher, and it's a really straightforward observation instrument, it doesn't have a lot of items, only 5 items per scale, and there are 3 scales. So this is really simple to use. But you can also visit another teacher's classroom when it's possible, and observe and have a discussion afterwards. And indeed, this discussion, okay, well, you scored a 1, so it never occurs in your classroom that students can choose their own work. What does that mean? And I think that these kind of discussions, we need that.
I think there is also an interesting question on the chat to you guys, I think, by Esther, who writes, it would be really interesting to know which elements of the classic Montessori schools are most responsible for better results. So what really makes the difference? That's the question, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's hard to discriminate. Really hard to discriminate, because but we do honestly we do say, well, we're like Montessori teachers, right? We're the best teachers in the world, and the Montessori educational system says it also shows better results, right? So, but we can't actually say what kind of elements are there more responsible for these better results. When following Lillard, for example, in those classic Montessori schools, why are they found better results? Well, there is not a straightforward answer to that question. So it could be implementation, but it could also be that there are better teachers on that school, for example. So it's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, and Esther follows the question saying, but yeah, you use 4 elements. Are they vividly important, or are they equally important?
Yeah, they're well, in the data we see that they are correlated to each other. So it means one cannot how do you say it, implement it without one other. So group structure makes it possible to have freedom, and it makes it possible to use the Montessori curriculum, for example, in a more or less way.
Yeah, we also did a study, a small-scale study with several Montessori schools in the Netherlands, where we measured executive functioning of students, or we compared the executive functioning of students attending Montessori schools, but also attending regular schools, and we didn't see a difference in executive functioning. So we measured executive functioning using working memory tasks, where students have to memorize and react quickly on a computer. These were highly validated tests, but we didn't see a difference. But we also measured Montessori implementation using our questionnaire. And you would expect that if you have a high amount of structure, group structure, curriculum, and freedom, which are the 3 scales in our questionnaire, you would expect also a high amount of executive functioning, but we also didn't see that relation, unfortunately. But this experiment was only done with a small group of schools, so we need more schools implementing this design. But we could not really discriminate what is it exactly that has a high correlation with executive functioning. But we are only starting to do these investigations.
Yeah. All right. My final conclusion is we need you, because we're here together in Montessori Europe on this webinar. And as I said, we will continue working on our European implementation study. We now have 172 European Montessori teachers filled in our questionnaire, but we need at least 500. So if there's any way you can help us spread this questionnaire, please let us know by sending us an email, because we need more Montessori teachers to have some more robust results on our research on European Montessori implementation. So if you have any questions or want to join us in our research for our 500 Montessori teachers, please let us know, and I will send you the link to the questionnaire, which you can spread out in your country to have more European teachers participating in our research. If there aren't any questions further, I would like to say thank you to you all for joining our webinar.
And I would like to say thank you very much to all of you who have decided to come here, and you guys, thank you very much. This was really, really interesting. And also on the behalf of Montessori Europe, I would like to invite you all to other webinars. All of them are posted on our website and other social media. We also have in the forthcoming future, on the 9th of February, have open meeting of Merge Working Group, the group that orients at research and practice. So we would very much welcome you during that meeting and the other meetings. Yeah, so thank you very much.